Hi, my name is Andrew Paul, and I am a teacher, an English teacher, and the owner of Świat Języków.
My name is Amanda Jackson-Piernik, and I'm also an English teacher here at Świat Języków and other places as well.
So we have a special idea for you today. We thought that we, as two native speakers who've been living here for some time, I've been here almost 10 years, Amanda.
I've been here a bit over 10 years, going on 15 actually.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what I thought would be a good idea is for us to go through some words that are Polish that are a bit difficult to translate into English, at least for us, and we would discuss them and help you to understand that sometimes when you express things in English that you don't necessarily, well, you can't necessarily express them so easily in English, and you have to explain what you mean. And we're going to try to help you to be able to express yourself more effectively.
Okay, because there's not always a good direct translation. Sometimes you just have to do the best one you can. So the first one we thought of was Miasto. Right?
Miasto. Now, that's pretty simple, you would think, right?
Right. But is it a city? Is it a town?
Well, that's it. It's always a question. A city like, or a town, or a village. So what's the term? And a lot of people have a lot of difficulty with that because in Polish, miasto can mean both city and town. But for us as Americans, what is a city? What would you describe a city as?
Or a certain population, and I'm not sure what that is, if it's like 50,000 or something, but it has to do with the population. And then there's a town with a certain amount of population, a city, a village.
So would you consider Bytom, for example? Would the Bytom be a city or would it be a town?
I think it would qualify as a city. But then if you have some smaller place, they also call it a miasto, right?
So I really don't know. It's really confusing because as someone from New York, I don't necessarily have the best idea because we think of New York as a city.
It's the city.
The city.
The city.
The city.
Right.
And then you have other towns or cities around it, which are suburbs. And I remember as a child going to Philadelphia and thinking, well, that's not even a city because as a child I thought cities should be the same size as New York. And Philadelphia with what, 3 million probably, is considered by everyone to be a city. But for me, as a child back then, I thought, wow, that's just a town.
A village.
A village. Which moves us to the next word, of course, is Wieś.
Yeah. And that one always confuses me because you could be going to a town that happens to be kind of out in the country or something, but it might even be a good-sized town, and then people will say they're na wieś, right? So they're in the village, or they talk about just being out in the country in a rural area or something, and talk about it being in the village, or what we would say would
they're
be
in the village.
Yeah,
it's a very strange construction.
Right. We would say, it's in the country. Somebody's from the country or in the country, meaning they might be from a small town or from a farm.
Exactly. You would say small town,
or
city, and then you would say from the countryside. But village, I always have this kind of, almost, it has a nice sound to it, doesn't it? I mean, oh, she lives in a beautiful village. There's cottages there. And here in Poland, on the other hand, it's always, oh my gosh, wiochas or, wieś. These are, it's from the sticks.
Yeah.
He's from a place that's, there's not a lot of things there. There's nothing for kids to do.
Well, I think this wiocha, tends to be negative. I mean, that would be like, talking about it in a way like, oh, it's just some, like in the sticks. But
I do think that village has a nicer sound than for even wieś.
Right.
So people here think that, oh, she's a villager. And for me, it has no meaning. As an American, it's okay, she's a villager. What does that mean? Greenwich Village in New York City?
Almost sounds like, if you're somewhere in the third world or something, but like, it's just, it doesn't translate the same way for us in our mind, if that makes sense.
So there are other things, of course, that have to do with where we live here in Poland, how to describe it. Another one would be, of course, dzielnica. Right. And how would you translate that? That's quite difficult. Most people tell me district is the best way to translate that.
Yeah, but then there's district, and that's kind of an official thing, but then if you're talking about a neighborhood, like you say, oh, I found myself in a bad neighborhood, or a good neighborhood, or, how would you say dzielnica? Would you say something else?
Well, in English we say neighborhood, which is a completely different word, which has to do with your neighbors. So, sąsiedztwo, right, is the word in Polish. But we don't use that word in Polish as much as they use dzielnica, for example. Bytom consists of several districts. But if you say districts, to me I always think of school district, police district.
Right.
I don't think of the town or the city consisting of different districts. New York City, we have boroughs.
And I guess some cities do have districts where, this is the... Oh, I can't even
But would you say district, or what district do you live in? That's kind of a strange question, isn't it? Which...
It depends. I think in some cities they do say that. like in, I don't know, like in the Mission or something like that, if you're in San Francisco, where they are pretty,
There are
yeah,
specific
they're
districts, so it is acceptable.
But you also you would just as easily call that a neighborhood, I think.
Neighborhood.
Yeah, you know, like what neighborhood do you live in? Oh, I live in.
So we use this, we're not as specific as they are here in Poland because they have so many geographic terms that are so specific. And for us to translate that in casual, everyday colloquial speech, say that I live in District 1 sounds ridiculous if you're talking about Horseshoe.
Right,
I mean,
yeah.
what area do you live in? What neighborhood do you live in? What street? Or I live close to the center. Or I live towards Highway 5 or something like that, we would say, as opposed to District such and such.
Right. No, it's also just a little more specific in Polish, and it's a little more fluid in English how we would go between, you know, calling something a neighborhood. Yeah.
I think that brings us to the other term, of course, is osiedle, which
That's
is a bit
very specific Polish word, I think.
Which for me is a terrible word to translate, because if you say development, which is typically a way that people translate it here, they say, oh, I live in this development, that's a bit strange. Or is it not? I mean,
well, a development, I think they flow together more here. Like you have different, you know, I guess, well, osiedle. So they're just groups of apartment buildings that are all built by the same builder, built at the same time. And I don't know, in the States, they seem to be more, I guess because everything's more spread out, it's more like, okay, this is a development that you're entering, and you wouldn't just kind of walk or drive through it.
Well, what would you describe it then? So, for example, there's a new development. That seems reasonable. There's a new group of houses that were built by one contractor or one architect has designed this place.
Call it an apartment complex.
Apartment complex.
Or if it's I guess if it's houses, you might call it a subdivision. You know,
there's so many different things that you could say, but the word development, it's really difficult because you would, again, probably use neighborhood to describe the area that you're living in, as opposed to district or development. Because development sounds nasty to me in some ways too. It could be like, oh, he lives in...
Or like a project.
A project, which would be the worst example. For example, Chicago.
Right.
Would be the projects, which has a very negative sound to it.
Right. Or I guess if you speak British English, you would call it a housing estate, which is also kind of projecty, I guess, you know.
All right, let's move on to the last word that we're talking about where we live here in Poland, of course, is block. So, apartment block. Now, that's quite difficult to explain for a number of reasons.
Yeah, because they're not all apartment buildings are blocks, but most blocks are apartment buildings.
Well, in British, of course, you say flat instead of apartment. Mm-hmm. An apartment is just a regular place to live. It is not some luxurious suite. Apartment, of course, is suite.
Right.
But, or...
like a really, really fancy.
Yeah, fancy schmancy suite. You know, you got your penthouse or something.
Yeah.
But for me, block, as an American growing up in suburban New York, a block meant the entire neighborhood on our block, right?
Well, because you have the grid system in American cities. The streets are really laid out in a grid. In European cities, most of the time you don't see that. Maybe
so basically you have one square after another, one road, then is perpendicular.
You go around the block, you're going in a square.
So it's an actual square, so it's a block. But if you said in our block, it would sound strange. You would say on our block, where there be many houses probably, if you live in the suburbs. But apartment block is also confusing because you would think that the apartments are rented. In the United States, typically apartments are rented, and in Poland, you own your apartment or flat.
Yeah, if you buy your apartment in the States, it has a different name. It's called a condominium, and it already sounds fancier and like it's your vacation place or something. But it's just an apartment that you bought. That's all it is.
We have a condo in Florida.
Yeah.
So I think that we've just given you a little bit of a hint of how complicated it is just to simply describe where you live in Poland to an American or to perhaps a Brit. And I hope that this little segment for you is something that will help you to be able to describe things to native speakers or people who are not Polish and make your life a little bit easier. It's been a pleasure, Amanda.
It has been. And that's just the beginning. There's so many more things we could talk about.
So if you're interested, we're going to be doing plenty more, and we hope that you enjoy this. We look forward, to any feedback, and well, bye-bye for now, and hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.